On the 21st of September, tens of thousands of Filipinos took to the streets of Manila to protest against government corruption. The protesters allege that taxpayers have lost billions of dollars to fraudulent flood relief projects. Money meant for development, they say, has been misused. The protests turned violent, with clashes near the presidential palace. But this is not only a story of the Philippines. In September itself, the world witnessed Nepal's Gen Z protesters against corruption that ousted KP Sharma Oli's government. Across the world, corruption and lack of trust in leaders are pushing people to raise their voices. From Peru and Argentina to France and Siberia to Japan, citizens are voicing anger over corruption and governance failures. When governments fail to deliver fairness and transparency, ordinary citizens are the ones who suffer, and often they are the ones who step out to demand change.
Dito kami para manawagan na tama na, sobra na, tigilan natin ang korupsyon.
Reformasi terbesar DPR adalah ketika lu kerja untuk rakyat, bukan lu kerja untuk ketua partai atau untuk partai lo.
Je suis venu le 10 septembre, la semaine dernière, pour montrer la colère. On en a ras-le-bol de se faire tondre comme des moutons.
On WION Wideangle this week, we take you inside these global uprisings. What impact do these anti-corruption movements have on a country's government? And can people's voices actually bring a change? Let's take you first to the Philippines. On the 21st of September, the heart of Manila became the epicenter of public outrage. Tens of thousands gathered to demand accountability for billions lost to alleged corruption. What started as mass rallies soon turned into one of the biggest anti-government movements in recent years.
The people are very angry because they have been victims of flooding for all these years. And flooding has made their lives so difficult. And yet the discovery that all the billions of pesos that were supposed to help them, that was supposed to solve the problem, have ended up lining the pockets of all these corrupt politicians, government officials, and contractors.
I feel bad that we wallow in poverty, we lose our homes, our lives, and our future, while they rake in a big fortune from our taxes that pay for their luxury cars, foreign trips, and bigger corporate transactions.
The allegations that sparked this wave of anger first surfaced in July this year. Rage over the so-called ghost infrastructure projects has been mounting since President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. put them center stage in a July State of the Union address that followed weeks of deadly flooding. Reports claimed that funds meant for flood control and climate projects had been diverted into the hands of politicians and officials. The numbers were staggering. Government figures estimated losses of nearly $2 billion over 2 years. In a country that faces up to 20 tropical cyclones every year, the impact was devastating. Projects that should have protected millions from floods were never completed. Dams remained unbuilt and communities were left exposed to the next wave of rains and storms. Residents of Bulacan province in the Philippines are feeling the real impact. With substandard flood control projects, communities are left without protection. More than 100 flood control projects built with allegedly taxpayer money are at the center of one of the country's biggest corruption scandals in decades.
It's the fault of those who gave them the contractor money. They should not have handed it over before the job was completed. Both of them are guilty.
I feel angry because everyone here is affected. There are a lot of families here in Francis. What we really need is immediate action, not just attention. Immediate action is what we need.
The protests gained strength as students, church groups, civil society and even celebrities joined together. The date chosen for the rallies was no coincidence. September 21st marks the anniversary of former dictator Ferdinand Marcos Sr.'s declaration of martial law.
We are here to remind our people that during the anniversary of martial law was not just about authoritarian rule. Martial law enabled the plunder of our nation's wealth. Unfortunately, authoritarianism and plunder continue to plague our country. So we are here to demand action from the government. We are here to demand accountability against corrupt officials in the government.
As protesters marched towards the presidential palace, the mood shifted. Police blocked their path. Chants turned to confrontation, and soon the demonstrations spilled into violence. Some in the crowd hurled rocks and Molotov cocktails. Riot police responded with water cannons and flashbangs. By nightfall, chaos engulfed the streets. Masked demonstrators waved a flag from the Japanese manga, One Piece, a symbol also seen in recent protests in Indonesia. More than 200 people have been arrested following the violent clashes between the protesters and the police. Several people, including the police, have also been left injured. These protests have brought the issue of corruption to the center of political debate in the Philippines. The government now faces pressure to explain where public funds have gone and whether promised flood protection projects will be completed. Another Southeast Asian nation that was rocked recently by mass protests is Indonesia. On the 25th of August, thousands of people gathered outside the parliament in Jakarta to protest against housing allowances for lawmakers, which is almost 10 times the national minimum wage. The initial demonstrations were peaceful, led mainly by students and labor unions, calling out corrupt elites and government policies they say benefited the rich and the military.
I pay all my taxes. I'm a tax-compliant citizen. Even when I was in the entertainment industry, I paid my taxes, but I don't know who my taxes are going to. Meanwhile, the people inside the House of Representatives building don't listen to the complaints of their own people at all. That's what makes me really concerned.
The lawmaker's allowance, correct me if I'm wrong, is $184 if calculated per day. Meanwhile, there are a lot of Indonesians living in poverty.
The situation took a sharp turn on the 28th of August. Footage emerged of a paramilitary police vehicle running over and killing 21-year-old delivery worker Afan Kurniawan. This incident ignited anger across the country, and protests quickly spread beyond the capital, with thousands taking to the streets in multiple cities.
The trigger was last night when our friend Afan became a victim. Honestly, I cried seeing the news. I'm appalled, I'm angry, all emotions are mixed in me. I want everything that's happened, all of the sins of the police, they should atone transparently.
We demand justice for Afan. Those responsible for running him over must be tried fairly and dismissed from their institution.
Hundreds of Indonesian motorcycle ride-sharing riders gathered at a cemetery in Jakarta for the funeral of Afan, the rider who was killed by a police vehicle during the protests. Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto also expressed his condolences.
On behalf of myself and the Indonesian government, I would like to express my deepest condolences and sympathy. I am deeply concerned and saddened by this incident. The government will provide for the driver's family and will pay special attention to his parents, siblings, and relatives. Once again, I am shocked and disappointed by the excessive actions of the officers. I have ordered a thorough and transparent investigation into last night's incident, and the officers involved must be held accountable. If it is found that they acted beyond the bounds of propriety and applicable regulations, we will take the strongest possible action in accordance with the law.
As the anger mounted, protesters attacked public buildings and set fire to the regional parliament building. This incident left 3 dead and 5 injured. Riot police and military personnel responded with force, using water cannons and other measures to try to control the crowd. The Indonesian president Prabowo Subianto had to cancel his China trip as protesters burned the infrastructure.
Due to the dynamic situation in the country, the president wants to continue monitoring the situation in Indonesia directly and seek the best solutions. Therefore, the president apologizes to the Chinese government that he could not attend the invitation.
By the end of the week, at least 7 people had died, hundreds were injured, and more than 3,000 arrests were reported. The protests also reflect wider public frustration over austerity measures implemented by President Prabowo Subianto's government. Since taking office last year, the administration has cut budgets across education, public works, and investment programs, while raising local taxes in some regions. The student-led movement, known as Dark Indonesia, has highlighted inequality, job insecurity, and reduced access to higher education. In response to the unrest, the government announced a reduction in parliamentary housing allowances and promised an investigation into the death of Afan Kurniawan. 1 police officer involved in the incident was fired, and 5 ministers were removed in a cabinet reshuffle. On the 12th of September, demonstrations began as tens of thousands of Argentines filled the streets of Buenos Aires. Their demand: increased funding for universities and pediatric care. Sectors that faced sharp cuts under Libertarian President Javier Milei's austerity program.
The hospital Garahan now voted in an assembly for a strike next week, and we need the whole country to stop. We cannot continue waiting because it is about the lives of our children. There are children dying due to lack of medication, and there are children who cannot be cared for as they should be.
The situation is catastrophic. We estimate 10,000 fewer teachers who across all national universities carry out research, outreach, and teaching tasks. It's a hollowing out of the university. So if we don't fight for our salaries, teachers will keep leaving. We won't be able to open laboratories. We won't be able to produce knowledge. We won't be able to transmit that knowledge. That's why we're fighting this battle.
The protests went on till the 17th of September. The protests come at a critical time. Milei's popularity has declined after months of deep budget. A corruption scandal and a recent legislative defeat in the Buenos Aires provincial elections at the heart of the September demonstrations were Milei's vetoes of laws that would have increased funding for public universities and pediatric hospitals. Protesters marched through the capital, pressuring lawmakers to reverse those decisions. By the evening of the 17th of September, the lower house of Congress had voted to overturn the president's veto.
We are hopeful. We are happy about today's vote. We arrived just as the voting was taking place. We hugged the doctors. We cried. But now it has to be implemented and it has to be transformed into real policies. We already know, for example, with the veto of the disability law that they say the government, will take to court, that it won't be put into practice. So it's a step. We are happy, but no one is giving up here. There's still a long way to go.
It was what the people wanted, what we students wanted, what the whole society wanted. It was only fair for what we all deserved. At the same time, I was outraged that we had to reach this point with healthcare, with hospitals, with people with disabilities, and it's a shame in that sense, but at the same time, very, very happy and very proud.
In September, even France witnessed widespread protests. The protesters' message was clear: scrap austerity measures and protect public services.
The government needs to understand that we are fed up with austerity, that there are real measures that need to be taken to save France, but these aren't the ones that need to be taken against workers. These are measures that need to be taken at the government level and the savings that need to be made.
The anger is immense, the determination as well. The message I want to send today to Mr. Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu is that the streets should be the ones to write up a budget. And if this is not the case, Mr. Lecornu will end up on the streets.
Teachers, train drivers, pharmacists and hospital staff walked off the job. Students blocked dozens of high schools. In Marseille, protesters marched from the old port, singing songs and carrying placards calling to tax the rich. Since protests were directed at President Emmanuel Macron and his new Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu, unions demanded that the government scrap its fiscal plans, increase spending on public services and reverse the unpopular pension reform that raised the retirement age.
There is a tax injustice because today the people who have the greatest fortunes are taxed much less in proportion than the everyday people who go to work for these large companies. Precisely. We know that billionaires have seen their capital grow almost 14 times since 1996. We can clearly see that today. A few people are getting richer, but on the other hand, what we see at the same time is that in France, the working class is getting poorer.
Clashes erupted on the margins of some rallies, leaving over 180 people arrested. Around 80,000 security personnel were deployed nationwide. France is no stranger to mass protests. From the May 1968 uprisings to 2018 Yellow Vest movement, street demonstrations have always played an important role in shaping French national policies. Moving to the Balkans now, in Serbia, crowds poured into the streets of Novi Sad, calling for early elections and demanding justice for the 16 lives lost when a train station roof collapsed in November 2024. This was the latest episode in a 10-month wave of demonstrations against President Aleksandar Vučić and his ruling SNS party. Protesters accused the government of deep-seated corruption, a lack of accountability and mismanagement that they say led directly to the Novi Sad train station tragedy. Hundreds of anti-government protesters clashed with police in the Peruvian capital Lima on the 21st of September as they tried to march to the government buildings in the city. The demonstration was organized by a youth collective called Generation Z, who were out on the streets to express discontent over a controversial pension reform plan and the government of President Dina Boluarte, whose approval ratings have plummeted due to ongoing scandals and rising crime. And then there were Gen Z protests that rocked Nepal and stunned the world. Thousands of young people took to the streets on the 8th of September. Protesters opposed the government's social media ban, but their anger went further. They raised issues of corruption, nepotism, and lack of accountability, often using the phrase "Nepo babies" to criticize political privilege passed down through families. For many young Nepalis, the social media ban was only the last straw. The demonstrations tapped into long-standing frustrations.
This is the protest by the new generation in Nepal. New slavery system has been introduced in the nation. Nepali youth's age is being sold. High post officials are involved in abuse of powers.
The protests in Nepal left at least 72 dead. KP Sharma Oli resigned as Prime Minister under immense pressure, and on the 12th of September, Sushila Karki was appointed as the interim Prime Minister of Nepal. How can anyone forget Bangladesh protests of last year, a 2024 student-led movement against discriminatory job quotas? Quickly grew into a nationwide demand for Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's resignation. Months of peaceful protests met with violent crackdowns and claimed hundreds of civilian lives. The movement eventually brought down the government. On August 5, 2024, Hasina fled the country, marking a historic victory for the youth-led uprising. From the Philippines to France, protests show how corruption and austerity directly affect people's lives. The demonstrations differ in size and context, but they share a common call for accountability and fair governance. As these movements continue, they highlight the challenges governments face in balancing economic policy with public trust.